Marcus woke up and froze. Standing in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, was the CEO who fired him yesterday. Her words would shatter everything he thought he knew about that night. The alarm hadn't gone off yet, but Marcus Thompson's eyes snapped open at exactly 5:47 a.m., the way they always did. 3 years of single fatherhood had rewired his internal clock to wake before his son, to steal those precious quiet moments before the chaos of another day began. He lay still in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of the old apartment building settling around him. Pipes groaning, neighbors shuffling above, the distant hum of early morning traffic filtering through the thin walls. His head throbbed with a dull ache, remnants of yesterday's disaster still pulsing behind his eyes. Not from alcohol. Marcus didn't drink, couldn't afford to lose control even for a moment, but from the crushing weight of failure that had pressed down on him since he'd walked out of Sterling Industries with a cardboard box containing 3 years of his professional life. "We're restructuring," they'd said. The words still echoed in his mind, sterile and cold, delivered by people who would go home to their comfortable houses, who wouldn't have to explain to a child why everything was about to change again. Marcus forced himself to sit up, his body protesting the movement. He was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from constantly fighting battles you weren't sure you could win. At 32, he sometimes felt ancient, weathered by circumstances that had aged him faster than any calendar could measure. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Something felt different, though he couldn't quite identify what. The air seemed changed somehow, carrying a scent that didn't belong. Something floral and expensive that contrasted sharply with the usual smell of leftover mac and cheese and the discount laundry detergent he bought in bulk. Marcus stood, his bare feet touching the cold floor, and reached for the sweatpants he'd draped over the chair the night before. His mind was foggy, fragments of memory floating just out of reach. He remembered coming home yesterday, remembered the crushing weight of having to tell his son that things were going to be tight for a while. Remembered his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, offering to watch Isaiah while Marcus went to clear his head. But after that, the memories became hazy, disconnected. He'd walked, for hours probably, through neighborhoods he usually avoided, trying to process the reality that he'd lost the first stable job he'd managed to keep since becoming a single father. The job that had finally let him move Isaiah out of the shelter system, that had given them this small apartment in a decent school district. Marcus pulled on his old university t-shirt, the one with more holes than fabric, but that he couldn't bring himself to throw away, and opened his bedroom door. The hallway was dim, early morning light barely filtering through the living room curtains. Isaiah's door was still closed, and Marcus could hear the soft, steady breathing of his son, sleeping soundly, blissfully unaware that their world was shifting beneath them once again. He padded quietly toward the kitchen, planning to start the coffee that would help him face whatever this day was going to throw at him. But as he rounded the corner, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. There was someone in his kitchen. A woman stood with her back to him, reaching into his cabinet with the casual familiarity of someone who belonged there. She was wearing what looked like his gray button-down shirt, the one he saved for job interviews and parent-teacher conferences, and nothing else that he could see. The shirt fell to mid-thigh on her frame, and her hair caught the morning light filtering through the window above the sink. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. Had he? No, he wouldn't have. Couldn't have. Not with Isaiah down the hall. Not in his current situation. He didn't do this. Didn't bring strangers home. Had built his entire life around being the reliable, responsible parent his son needed. What? His voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The woman turned around, and Marcus felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Victoria Sterling stood in his kitchen, holding his coffee mug, wearing his shirt. Victoria Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries, the woman whose company had just terminated his employment, the woman he'd seen exactly twice in 3 years, both times from a distance during company-wide meetings where she'd spoken about innovation and excellence, while Marcus had stood in the back row with the other junior analysts, invisible and insignificant. She looked different now, without the designer business attire and the severe hairstyle he'd seen in those meetings. She looked younger, more human. but it was definitely her. Those same sharp eyes that had looked out at the crowd of employees with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned their place in the world. The same face that had been featured in business magazines talking about her meteoric rise to CEO before her 30th birthday. "You're awake," she said, and her voice was different too, softer, uncertain in a way that seemed impossible for someone like her. "I was hoping to be gone before you woke up." Marcus couldn't form words. His mouth opened and closed, but his brain refused to supply anything coherent. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Reality had clearly broken because there was no universe where Victoria Sterling was standing in his kitchen wearing his shirt. "I can explain," she continued, setting down the mug and tugging at the hem of the shirt self-consciously. The gesture was so at odds with the confident executive he'd seen in those meetings that it made everything feel even more surreal. "Please do," Marcus finally managed, his voice tight, "because I'm trying to figure out if I'm still asleep or if I've actually lost my mind." Victoria's composure cracked slightly, a flush creeping up her neck. I know how this must seem, but it's not what you're thinking." "What am I thinking?" Marcus crossed his arms, suddenly very aware that he was standing in his own apartment feeling completely out of control of the situation. "Because right now, I'm thinking that the CEO of the company that fired me yesterday is standing in my kitchen, and I have no memory of how that happened." "You didn't get fired," Victoria said quickly. "The restructuring—" "Don't." Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through whatever corporate explanation she was about to offer. "Don't stand there in my shirt and tell me what losing my job actually was. I know what happened. What I don't know is why you're here." Victoria winced, and for a moment, something flickered across her face that looked almost like shame. "You helped me last night. There was a situation, and you helped me. I needed somewhere safe to stay, and you offered your couch. Nothing happened. You were a perfect gentleman, even though I was a complete mess." Marcus's mind scrambled, trying to pull memories from the fog. He remembered walking, remembered turning down a street he didn't usually take, remembered hearing something, crying, an argument. It came back in fragments. A woman in an alley behind an expensive restaurant, her designer dress torn, her phone shattered on the ground. Men's voices, harsh and threatening, fading into the distance as Marcus approached. "The restaurant," he said slowly, the pieces starting to connect. "You were running," Victoria finished, "from a business dinner that went very wrong. You found me, and you didn't ask questions. You just helped. Do you remember?" He did now, in flashes, offering his jacket, even though it was threadbare, walking her away from that alley, listening as she explained in broken sentences that she'd excused herself from dinner with potential investors, that she'd gone outside to take a call, that the men had followed her. Marcus remembered the protective fury that had risen in his chest, the same fierce instinct that flared whenever he sensed Isaiah might be in danger. "You said you couldn't go home," Marcus said, the memories becoming clearer. "That whoever those men were, they might know where you lived, that you needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere safe, just for the night. And you offered your couch without hesitation," Victoria said softly. "Even though I was a stranger, even though you'd just lost your job, you gave me your shirt because my dress was ruined. You made sure I had water and a blanket. You checked 3 times that your door was locked and that I felt safe. And then you went to your room and left me alone, no questions asked, no expectations." Marcus ran his hand over his face, trying to reconcile the fragments of memory with the surreal reality of this moment. "I still don't understand why you didn't just call someone. A security team, or you're Victoria Sterling. You have resources. My phone was destroyed, and I was—" Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I was scared and humiliated, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew those men had seen me leave the restaurant. They knew who I was. And when I tried to flag down a cab, they followed me. You appeared like someone who actually cared if a stranger was safe." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Marcus thought about all the times he'd walked past people in need, too consumed with his own struggles to stop. Thought about how easy it would have been to ignore someone else's crisis when he was drowning in his own. But apparently, his default setting, even in his worst moments, was still to help. "Isaiah," Marcus said suddenly, panic flashing through him. "My son. He's still asleep, but he's going to wake up soon and I can't." He can't see you here. He's been through enough without trying to explain why there's a stranger in our apartment. I know, Victoria said quickly. That's why I was trying to leave before anyone woke up. I called my assistant from your landline. She gestured to the old phone Marcus kept because it was cheaper than adding another cell line. And she's sending a car. It should be here any minute. I just wanted to make coffee as a small thank you, but your coffee maker is broken, Marcus finished. It died last week. I've been meaning to replace it, but he just lost his job. And coffee makers weren't exactly a priority when you were calculating how long your emergency savings would last. Victoria nodded, understanding passing across her face. She looked around his small kitchen, really seeing it now in the growing morning light. The cabinets that didn't quite close properly. The refrigerator that hummed too loudly because the motor was going. The careful organization that couldn't quite hide how little filled those cabinets. Marcus saw her seeing it, and something defensive and angry flared in his chest. This was his life. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe and filled with love, and he didn't need judgment from someone who probably spent more on coffee in a month than he spent on groceries. I should go change, Victoria said, breaking the tension. Before your son wakes up. I folded my clothes. They're on your couch. A phone buzzed. Victoria's assistant must have gotten her a replacement, and she pulled it from where it had been charging on his counter. The car's here, 2 minutes away. They stood in awkward silence, two people from completely different worlds who'd collided in the most unlikely way. Marcus wanted to say something, but what? Thank you for wearing my shirt? Sorry I helped you when you were in danger? The whole situation was so far outside the realm of his normal experience that he had no script to follow. Marcus, Victoria said, and the use of his first name startled him. In 3 years at Sterling Industries, he'd been employee number 4729. He'd been you in the back. He'd been the restructured position. But he'd never been Marcus to anyone who mattered at that company. I need to say something before I go, she continued, and something in her tone made him pay attention in a way he hadn't been before. Last night, in my most vulnerable moment, you treated me with more respect and dignity than I've been shown in most boardrooms. You helped someone who desperately needed help, even though you had every reason to be focused on your own problems. And she paused, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come easily. I'm the one who approved your department's restructuring. I signed off on the list that included your name. I did it without knowing anything about you, without understanding what that decision would mean for people like you. And now I know that the man I put out of work is someone who would give his last shirt to a stranger in need. The confession hit Marcus like a physical blow. She'd approved it personally. This wasn't just corporate machinery grinding him up. This was a direct decision from the woman now standing in his kitchen. So what now? Marcus asked, his voice hard. You feel guilty? So you're going to offer me my job back out of pity? Thanks, but I'll pass. No, Victoria said sharply. I'm not offering you anything. I'm just telling you the truth. And the truth is that I made decisions from a distance that affected real people's lives. And meeting you has made me realize how disconnected I've become from the human cost of those decisions. A car horn beeped outside. Soft but insistent. That's my car, Victoria said. I need to go. But Marcus, thank you for last night. For treating me like a person who needed help instead of a title or opportunity. In a city full of people, you were the one who stopped. That says everything about who you are. She moved past him, heading toward the living room where her clothes were folded. Marcus stood frozen in his kitchen, his mind reeling. None of this made sense. None of this felt real. He heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of her changing. When she reappeared, she was back in her designer dress, now wrinkled and torn, looking completely out of place in his shabby living room. She'd pinned her hair up, trying to restore some semblance of the powerful executive. But something had shifted. She looked smaller somehow, more human. Victoria paused at his door, her hand on the knob. One more thing, she said without turning around. You told me something last night when I was panicking about those men knowing who I was. Do you remember what you said? Marcus shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. You said that they might know my title, but they don't know me. That a job isn't who I am, it's just what I do. That I'm a person first, and everything else second. Victoria finally turned to look at him. I think you need to remember your own advice. You're not just an employee number or a restructured position. You're a father who's clearly doing everything right, and a man who helps strangers in their darkest moments. Don't let what happened yesterday make you forget that. And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Marcus standing alone in his apartment as the morning light grew stronger through his windows. He stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened, the surreal conversation, the strange intimacy of the situation, the uncomfortable truth that the woman responsible for his unemployment had just given him advice about his self-worth while wearing his shirt. "Dad?" Marcus turned to see Isaiah standing in the hallway, his superhero pajamas rumpled from sleep, his hair sticking up in all directions. His son's eyes were still heavy with sleep, but curiosity sparked in them as he looked around the apartment. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, forcing his voice to sound normal, even though nothing about this morning was normal. "You're up early." "I thought I heard voices," Isaiah said, padding into the kitchen. "Were you talking to someone?" Marcus hesitated for just a moment. "Just myself," he said, which was maybe not entirely a lie. "You know how I get before coffee." Isaiah giggled, the sound cutting through the strange tension that had filled the apartment moments before. "You're silly without coffee. Mrs. Patterson says so." "Does she now?" Marcus scooped his son up, feeling the familiar weight of him grounding Marcus back in reality. This was what mattered. This small human who trusted him completely. Everything else was just noise. But as he started their morning routine, checking Isaiah's homework folder, laying out cereal because eggs required energy he didn't currently have, making sure his son's backpack was packed for school, Marcus's mind kept drifting back to Victoria Sterling standing in his kitchen, to the way she'd looked at his apartment with what might have been understanding rather than judgment, to her admission that she'd approved his firing without knowing him, to her words about being a person first, everything else second. Marcus didn't know what to make of any of it. Didn't know if he'd just had the most bizarre morning of his life, or if this strange encounter would ripple into something more. All he knew was that somehow, in his moment of greatest vulnerability, he'd helped someone else in theirs. And that person happened to be the CEO who'd signed off on ending his career. The universe, Marcus decided as he poured milk over Isaiah's cereal, had a seriously twisted sense of humor. But as the morning progressed and he got Isaiah ready for school, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The world hadn't changed. His problems were all still there, waiting for him. But somehow he felt different, like a door had opened that he hadn't known existed. He just had no idea what was waiting on the other side. The school drop-off line moved with agonizing slowness, giving Marcus too much time to think. Isaiah sat in the back seat of their 15-year-old sedan, humming a song from his favorite cartoon, completely unaware that his father's mind was spinning through scenarios that ranged from rational to completely absurd. "Dad, you passed the drop-off spot," Isaiah's voice cut through Marcus's thoughts. Marcus blinked, realizing he'd driven right past the designated area where parents release their children into the care of the morning monitors. He reversed awkwardly, earning an annoyed honk from the SUV behind them, one of those massive vehicles that cost more than Marcus made in 2 years, back when he'd been making anything at all. "Sorry, buddy," Marcus said, pulling to the curb. "My head's somewhere else this morning." Isaiah unbuckled himself, but instead of immediately jumping out like he usually did, he turned to look at his father with those too perceptive eyes that sometimes made Marcus forget his son was only in first grade. "Are you worried about your job?" Isaiah asked quietly, and the question landed like a punch to Marcus's gut. They'd talked about it the night before last, before everything with Victoria had happened. Marcus had tried to frame it gently. Daddy's company was making changes. They'd have to be careful with money for a while, but everything would be okay. He'd promised Isaiah that much, even though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. A little bit, Marcus admitted, because he'd never lied to his son. Isaiah had been through too much in his young life, the loss of his mother, the instability that had followed, to tolerate anything less than honesty. But you know what? We've handled tough things before. We'll handle this too. Isaiah nodded seriously, then reached over and squeezed Marcus's hand with his small one. "You're the best dad. Someone will see that." The simple faith in those words made Marcus's throat tight. He squeezed back, managing a smile. "Get to class, superhero. Learn something amazing today." Isaiah grinned, his worry forgotten as quickly as it had appeared, and bounced out of the car. Marcus watched him run toward the school entrance, backpack bouncing, until he disappeared through the doors. Only then did Marcus allow himself to slump in his seat, the facade of confidence crumbling. Someone will see that. Marcus pulled out of the school parking lot and drove without destination, his mind replaying the morning's surreal encounter on an endless loop. Victoria Sterling in his kitchen, Victoria Sterling wearing his shirt, Victoria Sterling admitting she'd personally approved his termination. The whole situation felt like something from a fever dream, disconnected from any reality Marcus recognized. Women like Victoria Sterling didn't end up in apartments like his. CEOs worth millions didn't borrow shirts from unemployed single fathers. The worlds they inhabited didn't overlap, except apparently they had. Marcus's phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet car. He glanced at the screen. Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who'd become something between a babysitter and a grandmother figure to Isaiah over the past year. "Morning, Mrs. P," Marcus answered, trying to inject some energy into his voice. "Marcus Thompson, you better tell me what happened last night." Mrs. Patterson's voice came through sharp and curious. "Because I saw a very fancy car pick up a very fancy woman from your building this morning, and the gossip mill is already spinning stories." Marcus groaned. Of course. In their modest apartment building, nothing went unnoticed. Mrs. Patterson stationed herself at her window most mornings like a benevolent sentinel, keeping watch over the comings and goings of everyone on their floor. "It's not what anyone's thinking," Marcus said quickly. "I helped someone who was in trouble. Let them crash on my couch. That's all." Mrs. Patterson hummed, clearly not buying the simple explanation. "Well, that someone looked like she could buy this whole building. Just saying." "It doesn't matter who she was," Marcus said, more sharply than he intended. "She needed help. I helped. End of story." There was a pause on the line, and when Mrs. Patterson spoke again, her tone had softened. "I know you did, baby. That's who you are. I'm just making sure you're okay. Yesterday was hard enough without adding complicated situations to the mix." Marcus felt his irritation dissolve. Mrs. Patterson had been there through some of his darkest moments since Isaiah's mother had left. She'd brought them groceries when money was tight, had watched Isaiah for free more times than Marcus could count, had been a steady presence when everything else felt like quicksand. "I'm okay," Marcus said and tried to mean it, just trying to figure out what comes next. "What comes next is you come over for lunch," Mrs. Patterson declared. "I made too much meatloaf yesterday, and you look like you haven't eaten a decent meal in days. After you drop Isaiah at school, you come straight here. No arguments." Marcus smiled despite everything. "Yes, ma'am." But when he hung up, the smile faded. He drove aimlessly for another 20 minutes, past the Sterling Industries building where he'd spent 3 years trying to prove himself, past the employment office where he'd have to register soon if he wanted unemployment benefits, past all the markers of a life that had felt stable until 48 hours ago. His phone buzzed with an email notification. Probably another automated job search alert, another reminder of the hundreds of applications he'd need to send out into the void. Marcus almost ignored it, but something made him glance at the screen. The sender name made him pull over immediately. Victoria Sterling. Personal account. Marcus stared at his phone like it might explode. Why was Victoria Sterling emailing him? They'd said everything that needed to be said, hadn't they? She'd thanked him, admitted her role in his firing, offered some philosophical advice, and disappeared into her fancy car. That was supposed to be the end of their bizarre intersection. His finger hovered over the email for a long moment before he finally opened it. "Marcus, I know this is unexpected, and you have every right to delete this without reading further. But I couldn't leave things the way we did this morning. There's more you should know about last night and about what happened afterward. The men who followed me from that restaurant weren't random opportunists. They were connected to Gregory Sutton, one of the investors at that dinner. Sutton has been trying to force a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries for months, and when I refused to entertain his merger proposal at dinner, he made it clear he wasn't accustomed to hearing no. The attack wasn't random. It was calculated intimidation. My security team found them this morning. They've been dealt with legally, and Sutton is facing consequences that will end his career. But none of that would have been possible if you hadn't helped me last night. If you'd walked past like everyone else did. if you'd been too consumed with your own problems to care about a stranger's crisis. You saved more than just me in that alley, Marcus. You saved my company, my reputation, my ability to fight back against someone who thought power meant he could take whatever he wanted. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something. What you did mattered. It mattered in ways that ripple far beyond that single moment of kindness. And I can't reconcile the fact that the man who saved me is the same man I put out of work, without a second thought. I'm not offering you your job back. You made your feelings about that clear. But I am offering something else. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m. Just coffee, just conversation. No obligations, no strings. Just two people trying to figure out if there's a way to make something right. If you don't show up, I'll understand. But I hope you will. Victoria Marcus read the email 3 times, his mind struggling to process the information. A hostile takeover, calculated intimidation, her security team. These were problems from a world so far removed from his own that they might as well have been fiction. But the core of it, the acknowledgement that his help had mattered, that it had consequences beyond what he'd understood, that resonated in a way he hadn't expected. For 3 years, Marcus had been a cog in a machine, invisible and replaceable. Yesterday, that had been confirmed in the most brutal way. But last night, apparently, he'd been essential. He'd been the person who made a difference. Marcus sat in his parked car, wrestling with a decision that shouldn't have been complicated but somehow was. Meeting Victoria Sterling for coffee was absurd. She lived in penthouses and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. He lived in a 300-square-foot apartment and made decisions about whether they could afford name-brand cereal or needed to stick with the generic. But she'd asked, and something in her words, just two people trying to figure out if there's a way to make something right, spoke to a part of Marcus that had felt broken since yesterday morning. His phone rang again, shattering his contemplation. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Thompson? This is Jennifer Wallace from Brightside Elementary. We need you to come pick up Isaiah. There's been an incident. Marcus's heart stopped. Is he hurt? What happened? He's not physically injured, but there was an altercation with another student. We need to discuss it with you in person. How soon can you get here? 10 minutes, Marcus said, already starting the car. He made it in 7, breaking at least 3 traffic laws in the process. The school's administrative office felt like a prison as Marcus burst through the doors, his mind conjuring worst-case scenarios with every step. Isaiah sat in a chair outside the principal's office, his face tear-streaked and defiant. Relief flooded Marcus at seeing his son whole and unharmed, followed immediately by concern at the expression on Isaiah's face, an expression Marcus had never seen before, mixing hurt and anger in equal measure. Isaiah! Marcus dropped to his knees in front of his son. What happened? But before Isaiah could answer, Principal Rodriguez emerged from her office, her expression professionally neutral in that way that meant trouble. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, come in. Isaiah, you wait here. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder and followed the principal into her office, where another boy sat with his mother, a woman Marcus vaguely recognized from school pickup, always impeccably dressed, always driving one of those massive SUVs. Mr. Thompson, this is Bethany Morrison and her son Tyler, Principal Rodriguez began. Tyler and Isaiah had a physical altercation on the playground this morning. Tyler has a bloody nose, and Isaiah scratched his arm. Marcus looked between them, confused. Isaiah had never been in a fight. He was the kid who helped others tie their shoes, who shared his snacks, who brought home every lost toy he found, because maybe someone was missing it. What happened? Marcus asked. Isaiah doesn't just attack people. My son says Isaiah jumped him unprovoked, Mrs. Morrison interjected, her tone sharp and accusatory. This is completely unacceptable behavior. With respect, I find that hard to believe, Marcus said, keeping his voice level despite the rising anger he felt. There's no way Isaiah started a fight without a reason. Are you calling my son a liar? Mrs. Morrison's voice rose. I'm saying there are 2 sides to every story, and I'd like to hear Isaiah's before we start throwing around accusations. Principal Rodriguez held up a hand. Let's all stay calm. We've interviewed several witnesses. According to them, Tyler was teasing Isaiah about his clothes. He called Isaiah's shoes poor people's shoes, and said his dad couldn't afford real ones because he got fired. The words landed like a physical blow. Marcus felt heat rising in his face, a mixture of humiliation and protective fury. How did these children even know about his employment situation? How fast did gossip travel in this town? Boys say things, Mrs. Morrison dismissed with a wave. They don't mean anything by it. But violence is never acceptable. Violence? Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. Your son was bullying mine about our financial situation, and you're dismissing it as boys saying things. My son shouldn't have to watch his words because your family is struggling, Mrs. Morrison shot back. Maybe if you'd been more responsible with your career, your son wouldn't be an easy target. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Every instinct screamed at him to say something devastating, to put this privileged woman in her place, to defend himself and his son against the casual cruelty of her judgment. But he thought about Isaiah sitting outside, waiting to see how his father would handle this. Thought about the example he needed to set, even when it was the hardest thing in the world. My son, Marcus said slowly, each word measured, has never wanted for love, security, or dignity. He knows his worth isn't tied to the brand of his shoes or the size of our apartment, and he clearly knows enough to stand up when someone tries to make him feel less than human because of circumstances beyond his control. He turned to Principal Rodriguez. I'll speak to Isaiah about handling conflicts without getting physical, but I will not apologize for him defending his dignity and his family. And I expect this school to have policies about bullying that actually protect kids from this kind of targeted harassment. Principal Rodriguez nodded slowly. Both boys will serve a one-day suspension for the physical altercation. And Tyler will attend 3 sessions with our counselor about appropriate peer interaction. 1-day suspension? Mrs. Morrison stood, outraged. My son needs stitches, and you're giving them equal punishment? Your son needs a Band-Aid, Mrs. Morrison, the principal corrected firmly. And yes, bullying another student about their family's financial situation warrants counseling. This conversation is over. Marcus walked out of the office to find Isaiah still sitting in the chair, looking small and scared. He scooped his son up, holding him close as they walked out of the school building. They sat in the car in silence for a long moment before Marcus finally spoke. Want to tell me what happened? Isaiah's voice was small when he answered. Tyler said mean things about our shoes, about our apartment. He said his mom told him you were a loser who couldn't keep a job, and that's why we're poor. And I just got so mad, Dad. I'm sorry. Marcus pulled his son close, feeling tears sting his own eyes. This was what he'd feared most, that his struggles would become Isaiah's burden, that the harsh realities of their situation would steal his son's childhood. You're not in trouble, Marcus said quietly. Not with me. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and for our family. But we have to find ways to do that without hitting, okay? Because the world is always going to judge us by different standards. We have to be twice as good, twice as controlled, twice as dignified. That's not fair, Isaiah said, his voice muffled against Marcus's chest. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. But it's reality, buddy. And we're strong enough to handle it. Both of us. As Marcus drove home, Isaiah falling asleep in the back seat despite it being only mid-morning, he thought about Victoria's email, about her invitation to coffee, to conversation, to possibly making something right. He thought about Mrs. Morrison's casual cruelty, about how quickly people judged worth by external markers, about how his unemployment had become not just his problem, but his son's target. And he thought about what Victoria had written. You saved more than just me in that alley. You saved my company, my reputation, my ability to fight back against someone who thought power meant he could take whatever he wanted. Maybe, Marcus thought as he pulled into their apartment complex parking lot. It was time to stop being invisible. Time to stop accepting that his value was determined by his job title or his bank account. Time to remember that he was a person first, with dignity and worth that existed independent of circumstances. He pulled out his phone and typed a response to Victoria's email before he could second-guess himself. I'll be there, 10 a.m., but I'm buying my own coffee. He hit send and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too dangerous right now. But possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, this strange collision of worlds might lead somewhere unexpected. Isaiah stirred in the back seat, and Marcus glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. Whatever came next, whatever doors opened or closed, Marcus would face it the way he'd faced everything else, with his head up and his son's hand in his. Because that's what real strength looked like. And no matter what anyone else thought, Marcus knew his worth wasn't for sale and couldn't be taken away. It could only be given, and he'd decided years ago exactly who deserved to receive it. The Riverside Cafe wasn't the kind of place Marcus frequented. Actually, it wasn't the kind of place Marcus had ever been. Situated in the upscale waterfront district, it was the type of establishment where a single cup of coffee cost more than he'd typically spend on groceries for 2 days. Glass walls overlooked the river, designer furniture arranged with artistic precision, and every patron looked like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. Marcus stood across the street, watching through the windows as perfectly dressed people conducted their morning rituals. He'd worn his best, which meant his only intact button-down shirt that Victoria hadn't borrowed, paired with khakis he'd ironed 3 times to get the creases right. Next to the clientele inside, he knew he'd look exactly like what he was, someone who didn't belong. His phone showed 9:53 a.m., 7 minutes until he was supposed to walk into that glass palace and sit across from a woman who existed in a completely different stratosphere. 7 minutes to decide if he was really going to do this. You planning to actually go in, or just admire the architecture all morning? Marcus spun around to find Victoria standing behind him, a small smile playing at her lips. She wasn't wearing the designer business attire he'd expected. Instead, she had on jeans, actual jeans, and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, though there was no mistaking the quality of even her casual clothes. Marcus started, then stopped, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. I'm here. I said I would be. But you were having second thoughts, Victoria observed, not unkindly. I don't blame you. This probably feels like walking into enemy territory. Something like that, Marcus admitted. This isn't exactly my usual scene. Victoria glanced at the cafe, then back at Marcus, something shifting in her expression. You know what? It's not really mine either. Not when I'm trying to have an actual conversation instead of performing for an audience. She pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then looked up with a conspiratorial smile. Change of plans. Come with me. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria was already walking down the street, away from the intimidating glass cafe. He hesitated for only a moment before following, curiosity overriding caution. They walked for several blocks, leaving the upscale waterfront district behind. The buildings became older, more weathered. The pedestrians changed from business professionals to students, artists, working-class folks heading to their shifts. Marcus felt himself relaxing incrementally with each block, the neighborhood becoming more familiar, more comfortable. Victoria stopped in front of a small corner establishment called Mama Joe's Coffee and Kitchen. The building was old brick, with mismatched chairs visible through the steamy windows, and a hand-painted sign that had clearly been there for decades. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon wafted out every time the door opened. "This okay?" Victoria asked, and there was genuine uncertainty in her voice, like she wasn't sure if she'd made the right call. Marcus looked at the cafe, the kind of place he actually went to, where coffee was served in mugs instead of artisanal cups, and nobody cared if your shoes were scuffed. This is perfect. Inside, Mama Joe's was everything the Riverside Cafe wasn't. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable. The walls were covered with local art and community bulletin boards. The clientele was diverse. Students with laptops, construction workers on break, elderly couples sharing pastries. And behind the counter stood a woman who could only be Mama Joe herself, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, her smile genuine and warm. "Well, look who finally made it back," Mama Joe called out when she saw Victoria. "Baby girl, you been too busy with that fancy company to come see me?" Victoria's entire demeanor changed, her professional polish melting into something softer. "I'm sorry, Mama Joe. You know how it gets." I know," Mama Joe said, but her tone was affectionate. Then her sharp eyes landed on Marcus. "And who's this handsome man you bringing to my place?" "This is Marcus," Victoria said, and Marcus noticed she didn't add any qualifiers or explanations. "Marcus, this is Mama Joe. She's been feeding me since I was 22 and couldn't afford anything else. The revelation surprised Marcus so much that he almost forgot to shake Mama Joe's extended hand. He'd assumed Victoria had always been wealthy, always comfortable, always existing in that rarefied air of privilege. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," Marcus managed. "Oh, he's got manners too," Mama Joe approved. "Y'all go sit. I'll bring you the usual, Victoria, and—" She looked at Marcus appraisingly. "I'm thinking you're a black coffee and bacon and eggs kind of man." "That's exactly right," Marcus said, surprised. "Baby, I've been reading people for 40 years. I know my customers." Mama Joe winked and shooed them toward a booth in the back corner. They settled into the worn vinyl seats, and for a moment, neither spoke. Marcus studied Victoria in this new context, relaxed in a working-class cafe, greeted like family by the owner, sitting across from him in jeans instead of power suits. It didn't align with the image of the untouchable CEO he'd constructed in his mind. "You're wondering why I brought you here instead of the Riverside place," Victoria said, breaking the silence. "Among other things," Marcus admitted. Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug of coffee Mama Joe had wordlessly placed in front of her, steam rising between them. "I spent 2 years after college working 3 jobs to afford business school. I lived in a studio apartment smaller than most people's closets, ate ramen for dinner more nights than I care to count, and came here every Sunday morning because Mama Joe charged me half price and always snuck me extra bacon." She looked around the cafe with obvious affection. "When I finally made it, when Sterling Industries took off and the money started flowing, I went back to the expensive places because that's where business gets done. But this place, this is where I remember who I actually am underneath all the corporate armor." Marcus absorbed this, the image of Victoria shifting again in his mind. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Victoria said, meeting his eyes directly, "I don't want you to meet with the CEO who signed off on your termination. I want you to meet Victoria, who knows exactly what it's like to struggle, who remembers what it feels like to be one unexpected expense away from disaster." "That person approved my firing too," Marcus pointed out, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "She did, and she needs to explain why." Mama Joe arrived with their food before Marcus could respond. Perfectly cooked eggs for him, some kind of elaborate scramble for Victoria, and enough bacon for 3 people piled on a plate between them. "Y'all eat," Mama Joe commanded. "And Victoria, baby, you introduce him to your mama soon, you hear? This one's got kind eyes." She left before Victoria could respond, and Marcus saw color rise in Victoria's cheeks, the first time he'd seen her genuinely flustered. "Mama Joe has strong opinions about my personal life," Victoria said by way of explanation. "I've noticed," Marcus said dryly, and despite everything, he found himself almost smiling. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the food grounding them both. Marcus hadn't realized how hungry he was. The stress of the past few days had killed his appetite, but Mama Joe's cooking woke it up with a vengeance. "Sterling Industries was failing when I took over," Victoria said suddenly, setting down her fork. "My father had run it into the ground with poor decisions and worse ethics. When he died and left it to me, the board wanted to sell it off for parts. I was 26, barely out of business school, and everyone thought I was a joke." Marcus listened, sensing this was important, that he needed to hear all of it before responding. "I spent 5 years turning it around. 5 years of 18-hour days, of fighting boardrooms full of men who thought I'd gotten the position through nepotism, of making impossible decisions to save the company. And I did save it. Sterling Industries went from nearly bankrupt to one of the most successful tech companies in the region." Victoria's hands tightened around her mug. "But somewhere in those 5 years, I became the thing I'd always hated. I started making decisions from spreadsheets instead of thinking about people. I started seeing employees as numbers instead of human beings with families and dreams and struggles. I became my father, just with better PR. The restructuring," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "It wasn't just about cutting costs." "No, it was," Victoria admitted. "Sutton's takeover attempt was real, and it was coming because our quarterly numbers had dipped. The board was panicking, demanding immediate action. So I did what cold, efficient CEOs do. I identified the departments with the lowest ROI and cut them." She looked directly at Marcus, and there were tears threatening in her eyes. "Your department was generating excellent work. but it wasn't flashy enough for the board to appreciate. Data analysis doesn't wow investors the way flashy new products do. So I cut it, and I cut people like you who were doing essential work that nobody was bothering to notice. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked, his voice rough. Because that night in the alley, when those men were threatening me, when I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life, you didn't hesitate to help. You didn't check my credentials or my net worth. You saw a person who needed help, and you helped. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That the measure of a person isn't their quarterly performance or their ROI. It's what they do when it costs them something to do the right thing. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. You just lost your job because of decisions I'd made, and you still helped me. You gave me your shirt, your couch, your safety. You asked for nothing in return. And that made me realize how far I'd fallen from who I wanted to be. Marcus sat back, trying to process everything she was saying. The admission should have made him angrier, should have confirmed that his firing had been as callous and thoughtless as it felt. But instead, he saw something else. A person who'd lost herself in the pursuit of success and was only now realizing the cost. What do you want from me, Victoria? Marcus asked directly. You didn't bring me here just to apologize. I want to make it right, Victoria said. Not by giving you your job back. I understand why you wouldn't want that. But there are other ways. She pulled out a folder from her bag. Marcus hadn't even noticed she'd been carrying one, and slid it across the table. What is this? A proposal, Victoria said. After you emailed me back, I spent all of yesterday thinking about what you said in the alley that night. About how titles don't define who we are. About how jobs are just what we do, not who we are as people. And I realize Sterling Industries has been making the same mistake I've been making personally, valuing people for what they produce instead of who they are. Marcus opened the folder, scanning documents that made his eyes widen with each page. You want to create an entirely new department? Marcus said incredulously. Human capital development and retention? I want to hire someone to help me remember that every employee number is a person with a story, Victoria corrected. Someone who understands what it's like to be on the receiving end of corporate indifference. Someone who will push back when I'm about to make decisions that prioritize spreadsheets over human dignity. Marcus looked up from the documents, searching Victoria's face for any sign this was some kind of twisted game. But all he saw was earnest hope, mixed with vulnerability. You want to hire me, he said slowly, to basically tell you when you're being a terrible boss. A surprised laugh escaped Victoria. I mean, I was going to call it Director of Employee Experience and Advocacy. But yes, essentially. That's insane, Marcus said. Probably, Victoria agreed. But Marcus, you did something for me that money can't buy. You showed me what real integrity looks like, and I can't undo your termination, but I can offer you something better, a position where your voice actually matters, where you can help shape policy that affects real people's lives. Marcus flipped through the documents, his mind reeling. The salary listed was more than double what he'd been making before. The benefits were comprehensive, but more than that, the position description read like a mandate to stand up to exactly the kind of corporate callousness that had destroyed his stability. Why do I feel like there's a catch? Marcus asked. Because there is, Victoria said honestly. The catch is that you'd be working directly with me, reporting to me, meeting with me regularly, and given our history, given that I approved your firing, that might be impossible for you. I would understand if you can't separate those things. Marcus thought about Isaiah's face when he'd had to explain they'd have to be more careful with money. Thought about the fight at school, about Mrs. Morrison's casual cruelty, about the weight of providing for his son while maintaining their dignity. Thought about the bills piling up and the job applications disappearing into voids. But he also thought about the risk, about working for someone who'd already demonstrated they could make his life unstable with a signature. About the vulnerability of trusting someone from a world that had never shown him much mercy. I need time, Marcus said finally. It's a lot. Take all the time you need, Victoria said. But Marcus, I'm not offering this because I feel guilty, though I do. I'm offering it because I genuinely believe you're the right person for this position. You have perspective that everyone else in my company lacks. You understand what's at stake when we make these decisions, because you've lived those consequences. Mama Jo appeared beside their table, refilling coffee without being asked. Y'all look serious over here. Everything okay? Just talking about work, Mama Joe, Victoria said. Work, Mama Joe scoffed. Always work with you. Baby, when you gonna learn there's more to life than work? I'm trying to learn, Victoria said softly, glancing at Marcus. It's harder than you'd think. After Mama Joe left, Marcus gathered his courage to ask the question that had been nagging at him since Victoria's email. What you wrote about Sutton, Marcus said carefully. About the takeover attempt. How much of this job offer is about wanting to do right by people? And how much is about needing someone on your side in whatever corporate war you're fighting? Victoria didn't flinch from the question. That's fair to ask. The truth? Sutton's attempt failed, but he's not the only shark in the water. There will always be people trying to take what I've built, always be pressure to prioritize profits over people. Having someone like you in leadership, someone who won't let me forget the human cost of my decisions, makes business sense. It makes me a better CEO, but that doesn't make the offer less genuine. And if I say no, Marcus asked, then I'll thank you for your time, pay for breakfast, and never contact you again unless you want me to, Victoria said simply. This isn't a power play, Marcus. It's an opportunity if you choose to take it, but the choice is entirely yours. Marcus's phone buzzed, a reminder that he needed to pick up Isaiah from Mrs. Patterson soon. His son was probably driving her crazy with questions about when his dad would be back. I really do need to think about this, Marcus said, closing the folder but not pushing it away. Of course. Victoria stood when Marcus did, both of them preparing to leave. Take the folder with you. Look it over. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. And Marcus, whatever you decide, thank you for meeting me here, for giving me the chance to explain. You didn't owe me that. They walked out of Mama Joe's together, the morning sun bright after the cozy dimness of the cafe. Victoria's driver was parked discreetly down the block. Apparently she'd planned for this different location all along. Can I ask you something before I go? Marcus said. Anything. That night in the alley. Were you really as scared as you seemed, or was some of that— He struggled for the right word. Performance? To get help? Victoria's expression became very serious. I was terrified. More terrified than I'd been since I was 23, and watched my father die without ever telling him I loved him. Those men made me remember what it feels like to be powerless, to be vulnerable, to need someone stronger to step in. It wasn't performance, Marcus. It was me at my most honest moment in years. She paused, then added quietly, and you were there. Not because you had to be, but because you chose to be. That's why this matters so much to me. You saw me at my worst and helped anyway. I want to be the kind of person, the kind of leader, who would do the same. Marcus watched her walk to her car, the folder tucked under his arm, feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. As the town car pulled away, Mama Joe emerged from her cafe, wiping her hands on her apron. That girl's got it bad, Mama Joe observed. Haven't seen her look at someone like that since college. She's offering me a job, Marcus said, feeling like he needed to clarify. It's not what you're thinking. Baby, I've been reading people for 40 years, Mama Joe reminded him with a knowing smile. I know what I'm seeing. Question is, do you? Marcus walked back to his car, Mama Joe's words echoing in his head along with everything else from this surreal morning. He'd come expecting to hear an apology, maybe get some closure. Instead, he was walking away with a job offer that could change everything, from a woman who was turning out to be far more complicated than he'd imagined. His phone buzzed again. Mrs. Patterson wondering where he was. Marcus started the car, the folder on the passenger seat like a question that demanded an answer he wasn't ready to give. But as he drove back toward his neighborhood, toward the life he'd built for himself and Isaiah, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's words, about being seen as a person instead of a number, about having a voice that mattered, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this collision of worlds could lead somewhere neither of them expected. Marcus sat at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table, Victoria's folder spread before them like evidence in a trial. Isaiah built block fortresses in the living room, his suspension forgotten in the joy of creation. Mrs. Patterson poured tea, the good kind she saved for serious conversations, and studied the documents with sharp eyes that had witnessed 7 decades of humanity's complexities. Let me understand this, Mrs. Patterson said, adjusting her reading glasses. The woman who fired you now wants to pay you double to tell her when she's wrong? Essentially, Marcus confirmed, the tea burning his tongue. Mrs. Patterson traced the document edges with weathered hands. What does your gut say? My gut's a mess, Marcus admitted. This could change everything for Isaiah and me. Real stability. But why me? Why would someone that powerful give authority to someone she barely knows? Maybe she sees your integrity, Mrs. Patterson suggested. Real integrity, not the performed kind. That's rare in her world. Or maybe she's easing her conscience, Marcus countered, making herself feel better by promoting the person she hurt. Could be both, Mrs. Patterson observed wisely. People are complicated. Motivations are messy. Doesn't make the opportunity less real. Dad, Isaiah called. Come see. Marcus found his son beside an elaborate block structure. It's a fortress where homeless people can live safely, Isaiah explained, eyes bright. With free food and bedrooms for every family, nobody can tell them they don't belong. Marcus's chest cracked. His son was building fantasy solutions to problems he shouldn't understand yet. Problems that had touched their own lives too closely. You've got a good heart, buddy. You taught me, Isaiah said simply. You always help people even when it's hard. Back at the table, Mrs. Patterson had made notes. Observations about contract terms, questions about reporting structures, concerns about worst-case scenarios. You're asking the wrong questions, Mrs. Patterson said finally. What should I ask? Not whether you can trust her motivations, but whether you can trust yourself. Can you walk into that building daily, work alongside the woman who fired you and maintain your integrity? Can you speak truth to power when it's uncomfortable? Can you advocate for the powerless even when it costs you? Marcus sat with those questions. I don't know. Then that's what you figure out, Mrs. Patterson said gently. If you take this job and compromise yourself to keep it, you'll be worse off than never taking it. But if you can be exactly who you are, the man who helps strangers, who raises his son to build fortresses for the homeless, who stands up to cruelty, you might actually change something. Marcus's phone buzzed. Victoria's email subject line. No pressure, but thought you should see this. The attached article's headline stopped his breath. Sterling Industries announces major policy overhaul. New focus on employee dignity and retention. Marcus read with growing disbelief. Victoria had announced publicly, before he'd accepted, that Sterling was creating a department focused on employee advocacy. She'd committed to transparency, to treating employees as stakeholders rather than expenses. Without him in place yet. That woman's either very brave or very foolish, Mrs. Patterson observed. Maybe both, Marcus muttered. His phone rang. Mr. Thompson, Gerald Winters, Channel 7 News. We're following up on Sterling Industries' announcement. As a recently terminated employee, would you comment on whether your firing influenced these reforms? Marcus's stomach dropped. How did you get my name? We have sources. Do you have any comment? No comment. Marcus ended the call. His phone exploded. Texts, calls from different outlets. His private situation was becoming public fodder within minutes. Marcus called Victoria, hands shaking with anger. Marcus, I just found out, she answered immediately. Someone on my board leaked your name. They're trying to undermine the reforms by making this about favoritism. You need to shut this down, Marcus said tightly. I have a son. We don't need reporters in our lives. I'm working on it. Legal team is drafting cease and desist letters. But Marcus, they'll ask questions, make assumptions. I can't control that narrative without your help. What do you want me to do? Meet me at Sterling Industries. Let me show you something. Then we can face the press together. Or you can walk away, and I'll take full responsibility. Marcus looked at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded slightly. 1 hour. But if this is manipulation, it's not. I promise. Marcus arranged for Mrs. Patterson to keep Isaiah, then drove to Sterling Industries. The building looked different now, or maybe he looked at it differently. He'd never been above the 10th floor. The executive level was another world. Art on walls, actual carpet, windows with views. Victoria met him at the elevator, looking exhausted, despite perfect professional armor. Thank you for coming. She led him past her modest corner office to a conference room. Inside, walls were covered with poster boards filled with employee information. Not performance metrics, stories. What is this? Marcus moved closer. After Mama Joe's, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About jobs being what we do, not who we are. So I spent 2 days personally interviewing employees from every department, every level, asking them who they are beyond job titles. Marcus read the boards with growing emotion. Margaret from accounting volunteered at animal shelters. Daniel from IT was becoming a teacher through night school. Sarah from marketing ran a food bank while caring for her aging mother. On the restructured employees board, Marcus found his own story, not the sanitized HR version, but the truth. Marcus Thompson, data analyst. Single father raising Isaiah after wife, left when baby was 6 months old. Spent a year in transitional housing before securing stable employment. Despite personal struggles, maintained perfect attendance and exemplary performance. Known for helping colleagues navigate work-life balance. Currently facing job loss threatening family stability. Below, Victoria's handwriting. This is who we fired. This is who we failed to see. This cannot happen again. I didn't ask permission to include you, Victoria said quietly. I needed to put a face to what I'd done. Needed my leadership team to see exactly who they were discarding. Marcus felt tears threatening. Why show me this? Because you asked why I want you for this position. This is why. In 3 years, nobody bothered knowing this about you. Nobody asked. Nobody cared you were more than quarterly deliverables. That's systemic failure I'm responsible for. She walked to another board filled with proposals. I spent yesterday with every department head, new policies, mandatory manager training on employee well-being, transparent restructuring with employee appeals, hardship assistance programs, childcare stipends, all of it. But, Victoria turned to face him directly, I can implement all the policies in the world. I can mandate training and create programs. But without someone in leadership who fundamentally understands being on the receiving end of corporate indifference, someone who'll call me out when I'm about to make decisions that look good on paper but destroy lives, none of this matters. It's just performance. And you think I'm that person. I know you are. You've proven it. That night in the alley, you didn't calculate whether helping me was worth your time. You just helped. That's who you are fundamentally. That's exactly who I need. The board member who leaked my name, Marcus said. They're sabotaging this. Yes, Gregory Sutton still has board allies. They're furious because this affects bottom-line projections. They want me to look emotional rather than strategic. Are you? Victoria met his eyes unflinchingly. Both. Yes, I feel guilty. But I also genuinely believe companies treating employees with dignity perform better long-term. Studies show employee satisfaction correlates with productivity, retention, innovation. This isn't just making myself feel better, it's building a company that lives up to stated values. But if I take this job, Marcus said slowly, I become that narrative. Fired employee gets promoted. Looks like favoritism. Undermines everything. Unless we control the narrative with complete transparency. Acknowledging what happened, admitting mistakes, demonstrating that real change requires uncomfortable accountability. She showed him a brutally honest draft press release acknowledging his termination, her role, their chance encounter, the decision to create a new position, recognizing value of ignored perspectives. I'm not asking you to lie or perform. I'm asking you to stand beside me and tell the truth. All of it. The good, bad, uncomfortable. That's the only way this works. If we're both vulnerable enough to admit where we've failed and how we're trying to do better. Marcus's phone buzzed. More reporters, more questions. His private life invaded because Victoria made public commitments involving him without consent. You should have asked before making announcements, Marcus said, unable to hide his anger. You put me in this position without my consent. You're right, Victoria said immediately. I did. I'm sorry. I was so focused on making changes quickly, on not losing momentum. I didn't think how it would affect you, which is exactly the decision-making I'm trying to move away from. She looked genuinely remorseful. Victoria was trying to change, but change was messy, imperfect, involving new mistakes while correcting old ones. If I say no, what happens to all this? Marcus gestured at the boards. Then I find someone else. These changes are happening regardless, Marcus. You're not responsible for whether I follow through. But you're the person I want beside me, because I trust your judgment in ways I don't trust anyone else here right now. Marcus thought about Isaiah's fortress, about Mrs. Patterson's question about maintaining integrity, about employees on these boards deserving to be seen as complete humans. "I need to talk to the press," Marcus said suddenly, but not to announce a decision, to set boundaries. Victoria looked surprised but nodded. "What do you need?" "Nothing. This is me speaking as Marcus Thompson, not your potential employee. I need them understanding I'm a father first, and my son's privacy is non-negotiable. I can have PR team." "No," Marcus interrupted. "This needs to be me establishing that I have agency and boundaries independent of Sterling Industries." Victoria smiled genuinely. "You're right. Conference room downstairs?" Within 20 minutes, Marcus faced 3 reporters and cameras. Brief statement, then no questions, Marcus said steadily, despite his racing heart. "My name is Marcus Thompson. Yes, I was recently terminated from Sterling Industries. Yes, I've had subsequent conversations with CEO Victoria Sterling about potential employment. But here's what's most important. I'm a father to a young son, and his privacy is my first priority. Any coverage involving my family will be met with legal action. My employment decisions are mine to make on my timeline without media pressure. That's all." He stood to leave, but one reporter called out, "Can you confirm whether Ms. Sterling's policy changes were influenced by your termination?" Marcus paused, considering, then turned back. "I can confirm that conversations about human impact of corporate decisions are long overdue in many companies. Whether my situation specifically influenced Ms. Sterling's decisions is something you'd ask her. But I hope my situation makes all executives think more carefully about who they're affecting when making restructuring decisions from spreadsheets instead of empathy. That's the real story. Not me, but hundreds of employees whose lives are impacted by decisions made without considering human factors." He left before more questions, finding Victoria waiting in the hallway. "That was perfect," she said quietly. "That was necessary," Marcus corrected. "Now I need to go home and process everything before making decisions." Victoria's phone rang. Her expression changed as she listened, then closed her eyes briefly in pain. "What?" Marcus asked. "My head of security. Someone vandalized your car in the parking garage, spray-painted corporate sellout on the side. We're reviewing footage, but Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. The leak, the press, now this." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was his life being disrupted, property damaged, his son potentially at risk, all because he'd helped someone and now considered working for her. "I need to see it." They took the elevator down in tense silence. Marcus's sedan looked worse, crude red spray paint spelling corporate sellout across the driver's side. "My insurance probably won't cover this," Marcus said numbly. "I have minimum coverage." "Sterling Industries will cover it," Victoria said immediately. "Full repair, rental car, everything. This happened on company property because of company issues. We're responsible." "I don't want guilt money," Marcus said harshly. "It's not guilt money, it's accountability. Someone targeted you because of association with me and my company. That makes it our responsibility to make you whole. Please, Marcus, let me do this one thing right." Marcus looked at his damaged car, at evidence his life was being impacted by forces beyond control, feeling every decision's weight. He thought about Isaiah, about stability, dignity, whether taking this job would solve problems or create new ones. "I need to go. Can you call that rental car? I need to pick up my son." "Already done." Victoria showed her phone. 10 minutes. "And Marcus, whatever you decide about the job, please let us fix your car. You shouldn't pay for someone else's anger about my decisions." Marcus waited for the rental, newer than anything he'd driven in years, and drove back to Mrs. Patterson's in silence. Isaiah ran to greet him, then stopped. "That's not our car. Our car needed repairs," Marcus said truthfully. "We get to drive this fancy one for a bit." Isaiah's eyes lit with excitement, and Marcus felt familiar guilt shielding his son from adult complexities while knowing they'd eventually touch him anyway. That night, after Isaiah slept, Marcus sat at their kitchen table with Victoria's folder open, Mrs. Patterson's questions echoing, spray paint smell somehow lingering on his clothes. His phone buzzed with Victoria's text. "I understand if this is all too much. Whatever you decide, you helped me when you didn't have to, and I'll always be grateful." Marcus stared at the message, then the folder, then Isaiah's picture on the refrigerator. his son's gap-toothed smile capturing pure joy. The decision was his. The question was whether he had courage to make it. Marcus woke to find Isaiah staring at him with intensity, suggesting his son had been waiting quite some time. Early morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting shadows, making Isaiah's serious expression seem older than his years. "You were talking in your sleep," Isaiah said quietly. "About big decisions." Marcus sat up, rubbing his eyes. His mind had churned through scenarios all night. Every possible outcome, risk, opportunity. Apparently, his subconscious continued debating even after exhaustion pulled him under. "Sometimes grown-ups have hard choices," Marcus said carefully, patting the bed. Isaiah climbed up, settling against his father with complete trust. "Is it about the fancy lady?" Isaiah asked. "Mrs. Patterson said a fancy lady is trying to give you a special job." Marcus made a mental note to discuss boundaries with Mrs. Patterson, then realized his son deserved honesty more than half-truths. "Yes, a woman I helped is offering me a job that could change things for us, but it's complicated." "Because she's fancy and we're not?" Isaiah asked with blunt childhood perception. "No, because she used to be my boss and made a decision that hurt our family. Now she wants to make it right, but I don't know if I can trust that." Isaiah processed this adult complexity quietly, then said something that made Marcus's breath catch. "You told me that when people do bad things but want to be better, we should give them a chance. You said that's what love does." The words were almost exactly what Marcus had said months ago, discussing a classmate who'd apologized after being mean. He'd been teaching forgiveness, second chances, believing in people's capacity to change. Now his own teaching reflected back. "You're right," Marcus admitted. "I did say that. So, are you going to give the fancy lady a chance?" Marcus hugged his son close, feeling the weight of example setting, of living preached values. "I think I am. But it's scary, buddy. What if it doesn't work out? Then we'll figure it out," Isaiah said with simple confidence of someone who'd never known his father to fail at protecting him. "We always do." After breakfast, Marcus texted Victoria before second-guessing. "I'll take the position. But we need clear boundaries and expectations. When can we meet?" Response came within seconds. "Today, noon, my office." "And Marcus, thank you for trusting me with this." Hours moved both too quickly and too slowly. Marcus dropped Isaiah at school, where morning drop-off was different now. Parents who'd ignored him watched with open curiosity. Mrs. Morrison, Tyler's mother, actually approached. "I heard about the job offer," she said, tone different. Not friendly exactly, but no longer contemptuous. "That's quite an opportunity." Marcus studied her, looking for the trap. "It is. Look, I wanted to say—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Tyler told me what really happened. The full story. About what he said to Isaiah. My husband pointed out I might have been unfair in my judgment. Not quite an apology, but Marcus recognized it. An olive branch from someone who rarely admitted being wrong. "Kids learn from what they see at home," Marcus said carefully. "Maybe this is a chance for all of us to model something better." Mrs. Morrison nodded stiffly and walked away, but didn't rush to her SUV with usual superior haste. Small changes, Marcus thought. That's how transformation worked, not dramatic declarations, but tiny shifts accumulating over time. By noon, Marcus arrived at Sterling Industries mentally prepared for difficult negotiations. What he wasn't prepared for was the scene in the lobby. Security had erected barriers because protesters stood outside. Not many, maybe 20, carrying signs. Corporate greed hides behind social justice, and real workers don't need PR stunts. Marcus recognized one. Derek Chen, a former colleague from his data analysis team, also terminated in restructuring. Derek caught sight of him through glass doors. Recognition flashed across Derek's face, followed by betrayal. "Marcus? Marcus Thompson?" Derek pushed closer to barriers. "Tell me you're not going in there. Tell me you didn't sell out." Marcus could have kept walking, let security handle it. But he'd known Derek 3 years, eaten lunch with him dozens of times, celebrated when Derek's wife had their baby. He owed him more than silence. "I'm not selling out," Marcus said, stopping near barriers. "I'm trying to change things from the inside." "By taking a job from the person who fired us?" Derek's voice was bitter. "Come on, man. You're smarter than this." She's using you to make herself look good while the rest of us scramble for employment. What would you have me do? Marcus asked. Turn down an opportunity to actually influence policy? To advocate for people like us? I'd have you stand with us instead of with her, Derek shot back. We're organizing, Marcus. Former employees banding together to demand real accountability, not performative reforms. We could use your voice. Marcus felt torn. Derek wasn't wrong to be angry, to distrust corporate promises, but Marcus had seen Victoria's boards, witnessed her genuine struggle to understand human costs of her decisions. He believed, maybe naively, real change was possible. I understand why you don't trust this, Marcus said carefully. I barely trust it myself, but I've seen inside her decision-making process now. She's trying, Derek, really trying. And if I'm in there with authority to push back, to demand transparency, to hold her accountable, isn't that better than shouting from outside? Or you become part of the machine that grinds us up, Derek countered. You become the friendly face they put on brutal policies, the token example letting them pretend they care. The accusation stung because Marcus had worried about exactly that. Give me 3 months, he said impulsively. 3 months to prove this isn't just performance. If nothing real changes, if I'm just window dressing, I'll walk away and join your organizing effort. But let me try this first. Derek studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 3 months. But we're watching, Marcus. Don't make us regret believing you were different. Marcus continued inside, Derek's words following like shadows. In the elevator, he caught his reflection in polished doors and barely recognized himself. He wore his interview suit, the good one he'd saved, carrying Mrs. Patterson's Lent briefcase. He looked like he belonged, but felt like an imposter. Victoria waited in her office with 4 others around her conference table, watching Marcus with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Marcus, thank you for coming. Victoria stood professionally. I wanted you to meet key people before we finalize everything. This is Janet Rivera, Chief Financial Officer. Harold Kim, Head of Human Resources. Patricia Okonkwo, General Counsel. And Michael Torres, Board Member who strongly supports these reforms. Marcus shook hands, acutely aware he was being evaluated. These power players would determine if his position had real authority or was just an elaborate title with no teeth. Mr. Thompson, Janet Rivera spoke first. Businesslike. I'll be direct. Your proposed salary represents significant investment. The CFO and me needs to understand expected ROI. How do you quantify the value of what you'll be doing? Marcus appreciated directness, even feeling the trap. They wanted him speaking their language, justifying worth in metrics and percentages. But that was exactly the thinking he was supposed to challenge. You can't, Marcus said simply. Not in traditional metrics. But tell me, Ms. Rivera, what's the cost of losing your best employees because they feel undervalued? What's the cost of institutional knowledge walking out with every layoff? What's the cost of a reputation for treating people as disposable? Janet's eyebrow raised. Those are valid points, but they're still abstractions. Are they? Marcus pulled out his phone, prepared for exactly this conversation. Derek Chen, protesting downstairs, was in my department. Perfect performance reviews, developing a predictive model that would have saved the company an estimated $2 million annually. But he was terminated mid-project because his position looked redundant on paper. The company lost his model, his expertise, and now he's actively organizing against Sterling Industries. How do you calculate that cost? Harold Kim leaned forward. You've done your homework. I lived it, Marcus corrected. I know exactly what gets lost when you make decisions from spreadsheets instead of considering human factors. And I can help you avoid those losses going forward, if you actually give this position the authority it needs. Patricia Okonkwo spoke up. Let's discuss that authority. You're proposing input on all restructuring decisions, correct? The ability to flag potential issues before implementation? Yes, Marcus confirmed. With guaranteed audience with Victoria and relevant department heads. No going around me, no override without documented justification. That's significant power for someone with no executive experience, Patricia observed. It's significant responsibility for someone who understands the stakes, Marcus countered. Look, I know I don't fit the typical executive profile. I don't have an MBA or a decade of ladder climbing. What I have is perspective everyone else in this building lacks. I've been on the receiving end of the decisions you make. That perspective is either valuable to you, or it isn't. Michael Torres smiled. I like him. He's not performing. That's rare at this level. Mr. Thompson, Janet said, expression softening slightly. I'll be honest. I fought against creating this position. It felt like expensive window dressing. But you've made a compelling case. However, are you prepared for reality of what this job will be? You'll be caught between employees who see you as a sellout and executives who see you as an obstacle. That's not comfortable. Marcus thought about Derek's accusation. Protesters outside, vandalized car, media scrutiny. Comfort isn't what I'm here for. I'm here because my son builds fortresses for homeless people out of blocks, and I want to live in a world where that instinct is nurtured instead of crushed by systems prioritizing profit over people. If I can help build that world, even in one company, then being uncomfortable is worth it. The room quieted. Then Harold Kim said, "When can you start?" The question caught Marcus off guard. I haven't officially accepted yet." "Yes, you have," Victoria said with a slight smile. "The moment you walked past those protesters and defended the potential of real change, you accepted."
So when can you start? Marcus thought about Isaiah, childcare arrangements, million logistics of transitioning into a new role. I need a week to sort out personal affairs, but I have one non-negotiable condition. Name it, Victoria said. Those protesters outside? I want authority to meet with everyone within my first month.
To listen to their grievances, take their feedback seriously, and report back to you and this leadership team about legitimate concerns. If we're serious about change, we start by actually hearing from people we hurt. Executives exchanged glances, risk assessment, PR considerations, bureaucratic instinct to control narrative. "Agreed," Victoria said before anyone could object. "In fact, I'll join you. We'll do them together." Harold began drafting notes. Patricia discussed contract details. Janet pulled up budget projections. The meeting shifted into logistics and timelines, but Marcus barely heard specifics. His mind raced with reality of what he'd just committed to. After others left, Victoria gestured for Marcus to stay. They stood at office windows, looking out at the city where somewhere Isaiah learned math, Derek organized protests. Mrs. Patterson probably told everyone about Marcus's new job. "Are you scared?" Victoria asked quietly. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I keep waiting for this to feel like a mistake." "Good," Victoria surprised him. "If you weren't scared, it would mean you didn't understand the stakes. But Marcus, I need you to know something. That presentation you just gave my leadership team, that's exactly what I need. Someone who won't let me hide behind comfortable abstractions. Someone who makes the human cost unavoidable. Even when it's uncomfortable for you," Marcus asked. "Especially then," Victoria confirmed. She paused, then added, "There's something else you should know. The board is planning to challenge these reforms. Sutton's allies are mobilizing, arguing I'm making emotional decisions that will hurt shareholder value. There's a vote in a few weeks on whether to override my authority on employment policies." Marcus felt ice in his stomach. "And if they succeed, then everything we're building falls apart," Victoria said bluntly. "Your position gets eliminated before it really begins. The reforms get rolled back, and I probably lose my position as CEO. Why didn't you tell me this before I accepted?" "Because you deserve to make the decision based on the work itself, not the politics surrounding it. And because I needed to know if you believed in this enough to fight for it even when the outcome is uncertain." Marcus turned to look at her directly. In afternoon light, he could see exhaustion etched into her features, weight of responsibility she carried. She wasn't the untouchable CEO he'd imagined. She was a person fighting battles on multiple fronts, trying to change systems while those systems pushed back. "I met your mother," Victoria said suddenly. "Or I assume it was your mother. An older woman came to my office this morning, said she was Mrs. Patterson and needed to look me in the eye before she'd let you work for me." Marcus groaned. "She's not my mother. She's my neighbor. But she's protective. She told me that if I hurt you or your son, she'd make it her personal mission to ruin me," Victoria said with a small smile. She was very specific about having connections to newspapers and church congregations, interested in hearing about exploitative CEOs. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. That sounds like Mrs. Patterson. She also said you've been teaching Isaiah that people deserve second chances when they're genuinely trying to be better. That forgiveness isn't about excusing harm, but about believing in people's capacity to change. I did say that, Marcus confirmed. Then I want you to know I'm taking this seriously. Not just as business strategy or PR move, but as genuine attempt to become someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. And having you here, someone who will hold me accountable, who won't let me slip back into comfortable indifference, that's essential. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Isaiah's school. Early dismissal due to heating failure. Pick up by 1 p.m., please. I have to go, Marcus said. School emergency. Of course. Family first. Always. And Marcus, that's not just words. If this job ever requires you to compromise your relationship with your son, walk away. No job is worth that. As Marcus rode the elevator down, past protesters packing up, past security desk where guards now recognized him, past lobby where his reflection showed a man stepping into a role he wasn't sure he was ready for, he thought about Victoria's words. Family first. Always. He picked up Isaiah, who immediately noticed his dressed-up appearance. You look fancy. Did you meet with the fancy lady? I did, and I took the job. Isaiah was quiet, then asked, Are you happy about it? The question was more perceptive than any his leadership team had asked. Marcus considered carefully as they drove home. I'm hopeful, Marcus said finally, which is scarier than happy, but maybe better, because hope means believing things can get better, even when you don't know how yet. Like when we moved to our apartment, Isaiah said. You were hopeful then too, and that worked out. Marcus squeezed his son's hand. Yeah, buddy, just like that. That night, after Isaiah slept, Marcus sat at their kitchen table and drafted an email to Derek and other protesters. He explained his decision, his conditions, his timeline. He invited them to hold him accountable, to check in monthly on whether real change was happening. He didn't know if they'd accept or write him off as a sellout, but he'd made his choice, and now he'd live with consequences, whatever they turned out to be. As he hit send, Marcus looked around their small apartment. Nothing had changed materially yet. They still lived in 300 square feet with broken coffee maker and mismatched furniture. But something felt different, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. His phone buzzed with Victoria's text. Board meeting moved up to next week. They're accelerating their challenge. Just wanted you to know what we're walking into. Marcus stared at the message, feeling weight of accelerated timelines and intensified opposition. He'd barely accepted, and already the battle was beginning. He typed back, I'll be ready. We both will. And as he turned off lights and checked on Isaiah one last time before bed, Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. For 3 years, he'd been invisible in that building, his value unrecognized, his voice unheard. Now he was walking into a fight where his perspective might actually matter. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and it was only just beginning.